This is Brianna Speast, and I'm here with Jim George at his home in Lethbridge, and it is Monday, July 6th, 2015. To start off, Jim, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? When were you born?
Well, I was born in 1927 on a farm in southern Saskatchewan, where I grew up. I went to school. I went to a country school 3 miles away from home. We traveled with a little pony and a two-wheel cart. There were 8 in our family. I took grades 1 to 10 in a country school, and then grades 11 and 12 in the town school at Climax. And then I operated the farm for a year because my father was disabled. And then I went to normal school, trained to be a teacher. I taught for 2 years in Saskatchewan, and then moved to Alberta. I taught for 3 years in Alberta, and then we got married. I continued to work in Alberta. Taught for a total of 35 years. Took early retirement. Moved to Lethbridge. We built a house in 1984. Lived in it for 27 years, and then the yard in the house was too big for us, so we downsized to this house, and we've been here 4 years.
To what town did you grow up in Saskatchewan?
Close to Climax, 5 miles from Climax.
And you said you had 8 brothers and sisters.
I had
7 brothers and sisters.
And I had 4 sisters and 3 brothers.
And were you all fairly close?
Yes, there was about 2 years between each of us. They've all passed away now, except my younger brother and myself. We're the only 2 left.
Did you have a lot of chores on the farm growing up?
Oh yes, there was always chores to do. And the weekends and summer holidays were always spent with work on the farm. We never went away as a family on a holiday. My growing up years were during the Depression years, the 1930s, where there wasn't any money to do anything, so it was just to stay at home.
What kinds of chores did you do?
Well, we had 4 or 5 milk cows and some younger cattle and about 6 horses. Some pigs and chickens and turkeys, and there was always animals to look after, and a big garden. And during the summer, of course, there were lots of field work to be done. I was 15 years old when we got the first tractor on the farm. We farmed with horses before that. I really enjoyed the farm. I would have stayed there had my wishes come true. But there wasn't enough farm. There were 4 boys in the family and only farm enough for 1. And so I became a teacher, and most of my work in education has been as a high school principal. A job that I liked, found it very rewarding.
What did you like about farming?
Well, I guess I liked the field work with the tractors the best, and the garden. We had no irrigation there, so we depended on rain. Sometimes the returns weren't very much from the farm. I didn't care very much for looking after the animals. That was my least favorite chore.
What was school like for you growing up?
I found it easy. I guess I learned easily. I always got good marks, and I never failed anything. The same at normal school. Then I finished my Bachelor of Education degree by summer schools. I went to summer school in Edmonton for 12 summers. And then I took some graduate work in Calgary University. I have a Bachelor of Education and a diploma in administration. And honorary PhD in history.
Where did you get the PhD from?
St. Stephen's College in Edmonton.
What was your favorite subject when you were younger?
Favorite subject at school? Well, I liked mathematics, and in those days we took history and geography. I enjoyed those, and English. I didn't care much for physics or biology or chemistry.
What did you do with your friends during recess at school?
Well, when the weather would allow us to be outside, we usually played softball, but we had other kinds of games that we played, like Run Sheep Run, Steel Sticks, other kinds of running games. In the wintertime, when there was lots of snow on the ground, we played out on the schoolyard a game called Fox and Geese.
What can you tell me about your classmates?
My classmates, through grades 1 to 10, another boy and I were the only ones in our grade, the two of us. And when I went to high school in town, there were about 20 students in grades 9 to 12, all in one classroom. I think there were 7 in grade 12.
How come you went to town for grades 11 and 12?
Well, in those days, grade 11 and 12 were not taught in the country schools. In fact, neither were grade 9 and 10. We took our grade 9 and 10, went to the country school, but we did it by correspondence.
So would you send off your homework into town to get it marked, or?
No, the teacher marked it. And then at the end of the year, there was government exams we wrote for grades 9 and 10. The exams were sent out from Regina and then marked by the teacher. So we got our returns right away.
Growing up during the Depression, did you notice that a lot of people didn't have a lot? Or?
Well, it wasn't obvious as a child because everybody was in the same boat. And we weren't any poorer than anybody else, I don't think. Most of the people, including ourselves, did not have enough money to operate a car. Dad had a Model T Ford that he put up in blocks on the garage and sat there for I don't know how many years until he sold it. We grew most of our own food on the farm, so we didn't need to buy a lot of things, but for many years, several years, our family, the same as all the rest of them in the district, were on relief. Call it welfare nowadays.
Were there any relief camps around Climax?
Were there any what?
Relief camps?
No. There were some, no, there weren't any close to, I was up on along Highway 1, there was relief camps, but we were kind of off the main drag of the province. So we didn't have hobos around or people riding the rails and that sort of thing. It just didn't happen there.
Did you notice any changes once the war started around your area?
Well, yes, there seemed to be more money available, and the crops were better, the prices were better, and so Dad was able to buy another car, and we got a tractor for the farm, and expanded the farm up to 5 quarter sections. My oldest brother joined the army, and he went to Moose Jaw and to Regina for training, but he didn't pass the physical to go overseas, so he was discharged before the war was over.
Was he the only one old enough to join the army?
Yes. Well, my second brother was old enough, but you could get an exemption if you were required on the farm. And I wasn't old enough. The war was over before I was 18, or I might have joined up too.
So are you the third? Are you the third child in your family?
No, I'm the fourth. 2 brothers and a sister older than me. I'm in the middle, the fourth one. And then I have a younger brother and 3 younger sisters.
Did you notice any changes in how life kind of ran after the war was over?
Well, things were much better. People had more money. Jobs were available. Prices for farm produce was good, so there was a fair living to be made on the farm. And machinery became available again. During the war, of course, only farmers could buy rubber tires and gasoline. It was rationed. People living in town didn't run their cars because they couldn't buy gasoline. We didn't have any trouble because farmers got special coupons.
Do you think your family was a bit better off during the war because you farmed?
I don't know. The salaried people worked in town. They were well off too, and I think it was pretty equal. Some of the farmers farmed a whole lot more land than we did, and they, of course, were much better off than our family. we had our 5/4 sections was a relatively small farm.
How come you decided to go into teaching?
Well, at that time, it was the quickest way to make a living. 1 year at university and you could be certified and working as a teacher. And there wasn't any other trade or profession that you could do that. So my parents persuaded me to go into teaching. I don't suppose they could have afforded a university training if I had wanted to be a doctor or something like that. So it was a matter of finance.
Did you have to move away to go to school?
Yes. Normal school in Moose Jaw. And then, like I said, summer schools in Edmonton at University of Alberta.
Was it pretty different going from living on the farm your whole life to moving into Moose Jaw?
Yes, it was. It was a big adjustment to make. People were so close together in the city, and the way of living was far different. It was in Moose Jaw when I was 18 years old that I first saw a flush toilet. So the way we lived was quite different. We didn't have running water on the farm, and we didn't have electricity. So that moving to the city was quite a different way to live.
Did you miss the farm?
Yes, I wished many times I could have stayed.
Was there anything you did for recreation while you were going to school, like dances or sports or anything like that?
Well, no, I was not much in sports. We had, as I was going to school, we had an annual track and field meet where about a dozen different schools competed. That was probably the main sports event.
Where did you first teach?
My first school for the first year was in a little village called Instow, Instow, Instow. It was about 40 miles from home, just out of the town of Shaunavon. It was a one-room school in the hamlet. It wasn't a village, a hamlet. Since then, the school and all of the buildings in the hamlet have disappeared, and that area is farmed right over. You can't tell there was ever any buildings or school there. The second year, I went to another village closer to home called Bracken. And there just for a year, and then I got information about the education system in Alberta. Salaries were better, opportunities were better, so I moved to Alberta and started to teach here. Moved around quite a bit. I think I taught in 11 different schools. My choice of work was administration, especially in the high school. The biggest school I had was the last one was Medicine Hat High School. Staff of 80, about 1,500 students. So it was a busy place. exciting.
Did any of your family move to Alberta ever?
Yes. My brothers all moved to, the four of us all moved to Alberta, and all found different kinds of work. My second oldest brother returned to the farm in Saskatchewan, and he farmed it for 40 years. But the other two brothers stayed in Alberta. One of them worked as a grain buyer, and one of them worked as a field service man for Department of Agriculture.
Was it pretty common in those days to get your bachelor's degree?
Yes, it was possible to get a certificate with just 1 year of university, but we were encouraged to continue and get at least a bachelor's degree. And if you were going into administration, you had to have some training beyond that. I never did complete a master's degree. I went the route of administration, diploma in administration. So I never got a master's degree, but I held some good jobs. I was superintendent of schools in the Taber School Division for 7 years. It seemed in those years, when I was actively teaching, that I could get pretty near any job I applied for. There were lots of jobs. Teachers were scarce. It's quite different now. There's too many people and not enough jobs.
Why do you think teachers were so scarce? Because I've heard a lot of people say that that Alberta and Saskatchewan really needed teachers. How come no one was going into teaching?
Well, I think a part of the scarcity was the men who went to the war. And in those years, when I was growing up, all our neighbors had big families, 6 or 7 or 8 or up to 12. So there were lots of children that needed to go to school.
What would you say has been your favorite teaching or administrative position?
Well, the last job I had was my favorite, Medicine Hat High School.
How come that was your favorite?
Well, I had always wanted to administer a big high school, and I finally made it. And it was more satisfying than I expected. Sometimes frustrating. Sometimes difficult decisions, but by and large, I enjoyed the association with the students. I think that's why I liked the high school, because the students were more mature. And I made lots of good friends in the teaching staff.
So this kind of goes back a little bit, but when did you meet your wife?
I met her first in 1949, and we were married 3 years later in 1952. So we have just celebrated our 63rd anniversary.
Where did you meet her?
I met her in Iron Springs, which is north of Lethbridge here. That's where she grew up. She was still going to high school when I met her. And we had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. And we have 6 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren. So that seems to be what keeps us busy now, is the family.
What are all your kids up to?
Well, our oldest son is a musician, music teacher, and he has conducts a band and an orchestra, and a lot of private music students. Our second son followed in my footsteps. He's a school principal in Medicine Hat. And our daughter became a pharmacist, worked as a hospital pharmacist in Calgary, mostly at the Foothills Hospital, but prior to that at the old General Hospital. She has just retired. The boys are still working.
What do you feel are the most important things in life?
Well, I guess it has to be family. And secondly, good health. I seem to have gotten along so that money enough is not a problem. So family and good health, I guess those are the most important.
Does your family get along pretty well?
Yes, we do. And I've commented on that many times, that I'm so glad that our members of our family get along. Not only they get along with each other, they're fond of each other. And so it's a very close family. We always get together for birthdays and other kinds of celebrations.
Were your siblings growing up pretty close?
I guess we were. After we got grown up, we kind of went our separate ways. And we didn't really spend a lot of time with each other after we left home.
What are you worried that people might forget about the past?
Not really. When I look around at how many communities have prepared a community history book where they've preserved the history of their community and the family histories that are recorded there, and the numbers of museums and historic places that are recognized as historic. No, I don't think they'll forget the past. What I would think that should be more important to young people is that they should realize they are making history. They are part of history every day. And they probably just live day by day and don't think much of it.
How did you get your honorary PhD?
Well, I did some historical research in church history. I wrote the history of a little country church up west of Pincher Creek. For about 37 years, I think, I was involved with the what we call the Banff Men's Conference. The United Church Conference met every year in Banff. And I wrote the history of the 75 years of that organization. I wrote a biography of a retired minister that I had come to know here in Lethbridge. I had put together family histories. And so a friend of mine, our minister at the time, wanted to recognize the time I had spent writing history, and so he nominated me for this degree at St. Stephen's College, which is a United Church College, or it isn't a college anymore, but it's still there. And so that degree was awarded.
What do you want people to remember about you and your life?
Well, I would hope that they would remember that I was easy to get along with, pleasant person, lots of friends, hard worker. I don't work so hard anymore, but I did when I was earning a living.
Is there any stories about your childhood or your working years that you would want your kids and grandkids to know, and great-grandkids?
Oh, I don't know. I can't think of a story yet. No, nothing comes to mind.
In that case, then we are going to talk a little bit about your involvement at the Prairie Tractor Club.
Yes.
So how did you first get involved with the club?
Well, I'd always been interested in history, and I heard about the Tractor Club. And so, it's 15 years ago, I became a member. And what drew us to the Tractor Club initially was that one of the buildings in the museum there had been a garage owned by my wife's uncle. And so we had a family connection to the museum. And when I first became a member, the Rogers garage was used as just a storage place, and a bunch of junk dumped in it because they had no place else for it. So I saw that as my first interest, is to clean up and restore that garage. So we had a fundraising committee, put together some money, and the place needed some repair and painting, cleaning up, which we've done. And then my job there at the museum has evolved into I'm the sign maker, the historian. And so when something comes along that, for instance, we acquired the ferry from, it was called the Finnegan Ferry, halfway between Brooks and Hannah up in that country. I researched the history of the ferries in Alberta, and that particular one, and had a big sign made for it. And that seemed to be the start of what I've been doing for the past 10 years, is when something comes along that needs research, do that and prepare a sign. We have a CPR station on the grounds there. And so I interviewed a lot of people and wrote up a description of what station agent and the section man on the CPR, what their work was. And so that's put together in a big sign for people to read. And that's been repeated over and over out there.
What can you tell me about the history of the CPR station?
It was originally at New Dayton. Built in 1924. And at that time there was a similar station every 8 miles or so along the track. Every little village had a station and a station agent. And that particular station, I can't give you the date, I'd have to look it up, was closed because the trucks sort of took all the transportation, and a lot of the stuff that had been done express hauled by the train, now hauled by trucks. And so they didn't need the station agents at every little village. And so all over the country, the stations were closed, and the railway tracks pulled up. That station was bought by a man by the name of Peter Marcus. He moved it into Lethbridge, or close to Lethbridge, on his farm, and intended to find a spot for it that would preserve it. And eventually the spot was found out in Picture Butte, and the station moved out there. And it has been repaired and painted, and a new roof and platform around the outside, and so it looks like a station again. The freight shed looks like a freight shed. And the living quarters where the station agent normally lived upstairs have been restored, so it looks like a home upstairs.
What do you think are the best accomplishments of the Tractor Club, or Coyote Flats Pioneer Village as it's now called?
Well, I guess the best accomplishment was the evolvement from a hobby club. It started by 4 men who were interested in repairing old tractors, and it gradually evolved into a full-fledged museum. Largely because people wanted to get rid of stuff. And some of the stuff, well, most of the stuff that was donated was worthwhile. Some of it wasn't, and couldn't be used. There's dozens and dozens of wrecks of tractors that are there that are just sitting rusting. But there's about 300 that have been restored, along with a lot of other machinery and the buildings.
What would you say is your favorite project that you've worked on or researched for the Tractor Club?
Well, the house that we call the Eaton House is one of them. People are surprised that you could order a house through the catalog. But from about 1905 to 1930, Eaton's sold houses. They also sold barns and schools. And, you could buy the pre-cut lumber delivered to the closest railway station. And an awful lot of people did that. This particular house was bought in 1915. Our family lived in it for I don't know how many years, and then it sat vacant on the farm for a while. And rather than have it torn down, it was moved to the museum and completely restored. Have you been in it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's lovely. I guess that's one of the most important one. The project that I'm working on at present is to tell about the ice industry. And we have most of the stuff out there that would tell it. It is just a matter of finding a location and bringing it together. We have a little implement that was pulled by a horse that and it had like handlebars and a blade, and the horse, as they dragged along, marked a mark in the ice on a lake or a river. And this device had a little marker on it 3 feet over, so the horse would go in one direction and then come back 3 feet over and then crossways, so that it was marked in blocks 3 feet square. And then these blocks would be sawn out by hand, a big saw, about the blade about 4 feet long. We have one of those at the museum. And the blocks then hauled to farms or storage places, to ice houses as we called them, and covered over with sawdust, and they would last all summer. The main use was for ice boxes, because this was in pre-refrigeration days, pre-electricity days. And if the farmers didn't have an ice box, they kept their perishable food like milk and butter in a bucket that they'd let down in the well. That was the coolest place on the farm. And so the use of an ice box was really made a big difference. But of course, when electricity became common, then people got refrigerators and much later deep freezes, so that the whole ice industry had disappeared. But it used to be as common in towns for the iceman to come as it was for the milkman. It was a full-time job to deliver ice to people's homes. It was never delivered to our place because we had an ice house that we kept the ice in.
So what years was the ice industry really common in Alberta, and I guess probably...
Well, I guess from, I don't know when it would start, before the turn of the century, I would think, when ice boxes were made. And it was very common through the 1920s and 30s. began to fade out in the 1940s, probably, in my experience anyway. So I'm hoping that we can put all of these things together. We have ice tongs, like I said, an ice saw, ice cream freezers, ice boxes, and these things are kind of scattered around the museum. And my project is to try and bring these together and tell the story of when the ice industry was important. I like to do that because it's a thing that has disappeared entirely. And people look at you kind of strange if you say the Iceman cometh.
Did you ever make ice cream growing up?
Oh, yes. Yes. Frequently we had a hand-turned ice cream freezer, a gallon, maybe a gallon of ice cream. And, of course, on the farm we had fresh cream and eggs to make the ice cream. You'd chip off a piece off a block of ice and then chop it up into fine bits. Put it around the ice in the ice cream freezer. You had to add salt to it because melting ice is not below freezing, and it wouldn't freeze but you put salt in it, the temperature goes way down. And so it was cold enough with ice in the salt water that the ice cream would freeze.
Going back to the Tractor Club, is there anything that you've seen or that has happened that you think could have been done better or differently?
I don't know. The concern is the museum has grown beyond volunteers. And the concern is that it requires money to run it. And we have some fundraising projects during the year. And we get some grants, special grants. We get some money through the casino. But I think that's everybody's concern, is hopefully there'll be enough money in future years to continue it. And I would hope it would continue to expand. Our district here in southern Alberta is a really multinational, multicultural mix. And I would like to see a special place there to tell the story of the Dutch people, the Japanese people, the Hungarians, the natives, and so on. But that would be a future direction that the museum might be able to take. It keeps on going. People donate buildings or donate machinery and equipment, artifacts, so that it's now, I would say, well, it's a recognized museum. We call it $1 million project. And I'm currently working on the history of the museum in a book. Or maybe nearly half done.
So is that starting from 1982?
Yes.
Have you worked with anyone through the Tractor Club who's really inspired you or affected your life?
Well, I don't know. I think that John Rutledge has been an inspiration. He was president for must be four or 5 years in the past, and he runs a metalworking business in Picture Butte. The amount of time and energy and money that he donated to the club while he was president, and he's still doing it, is just amazing. I think he doesn't get enough recognition. The other one that's an inspiration, and he's not able to work anymore, is Leonard Dunn. Do you know Leonard?
Mm-hmm. I interviewed him
Yeah.
last week.
Yeah. There wouldn't be a museum there if it wasn't for Leonard. He was there in the starting years when it was a hobby club, and I don't know whether he wanted it to be beyond a hobby club, but he did most of the mechanical repairs, the restoring of the machinery, the reception to visitors, tour guide, for years and years. And I think the thing kind of got away on him. It became bigger than he could handle, and it kind of developed into a junky place until about 4 or 5 years ago, when we had a committee trained in cataloging, and they have that committee of women, I don't know how many are on it, have really cleaned up the place, put displays out, got rid of some duplicates, and now all of the items are on computer, as you know. Well, there's some of the machinery not, but most of it is.
So growing up in rural Saskatchewan and then seeing the Tractor Club and all the buildings and machinery that they have there, do you feel that it's a fairly accurate representation of what life was like?
Yes, it is. I think it's a good representation of the transition and the change in agriculture practices. The museum is of primary interest to people who have agriculture background. And if they don't have farm background, it doesn't mean very much to them, I don't think. But I'm glad that the museum has grown beyond an agriculture museum, so that it is an attraction to the general public.
Do you have any advice you would give to young people today?
Well, just be aware of that they are making history, and that the immediate past that they can remember should be recorded. But with the kinds of equipment now that people can record history, what's the word I want? Digital equipment, so that the recording of present-day history is quite different from what it was in the pre-digital age.